Rezyl Azzir was a man. In time, his kind would be called Titan. Mountains of muscle and might and metal. His collar was fur and teeth, his person clad in ornate, golden-etched plating, trophies upon his shoulders. This was before the city was the city. This is before the walls, still in the shadow of the fragile giant above, but before. Salvation seekers came, survivors, weary remnants of a people on the brink. These were the days before reason took hold, before study was merged with belief. The giant was looked to as one would a god. Maybe it still is. Factions grew from the huddled masses, like minds coming together to provide support, comfort. Over time, these loyalties demanded loyalty. Differences that used to inform, viewpoints that when joined granted a larger understanding of the whole, became points of conflict. The sanctuary became divided. The shadow of light grew darker. This, humanity's last oasis, slowly fading to a mirage. Great, powerful men and women, the Risen, stood at the faction's sides. Protection, enforcers, misused possibility. Misery crept into this false paradise. Yet hope lingered. Seeing the cracks in this society born beneath the giant's fractured shell, some among the Risen challenged the dissolution of all that could be. They would no longer serve as instruments of oppression. They would be more. Thus began an unnecessary war made necessary by greed, ambition, fear. And in the chaos of this struggle came the scavengers, aliens with appetites. A common enemy. In the end, the scavengers were repelled and the factions fell, their grip broken, though their beliefs remained. This was the earliest days of the Guardians, when might found purpose. Prosperity was in reach. Rezyl had been a champion of these wars, a leader. Against the alien pirates, he had been more. If the giant wasn't a god, then maybe Rezyl was. As the first walls formed, built of hard work and sacrifice, Rezyl and the Guardians stood against alien plunderers time and again. More survivors arrived, more warriors. The Guardian ranks swelled. The city grew. Hope blossomed. To Rezyl, it was a currency. Hope bought tomorrow. Tomorrow bought the effort needed to survive today. Yet Rezyl grew weary. Stories haunted his nights. Old stories. Those no longer told. Those locked behind tight lips for fear of what they may invoke. Whenever the sun dropped below the horizon and the moon rose high, Rezyl's thoughts wandered. How safe was safe? How long could they fight with the darkness still writhing? So, every day, Rezyl would fight and build and protect. And every day, a city grew beneath the giant. And every night he would think about all that was never said and stare intently at the moon above. This Grimoire card does a really good job setting up the idea of the very earliest days of the Last City. You have Rezyl Azzir, one of the most important named characters in all of Destiny. A character I'm not really going to get into today, but eventually I would love to get into. He's a center point in one of the most important stories in the history of Destiny. But Rezyl is really, when it comes down to it, the first Titan, the first Guardian, the first of his kind. There are Risen, there are Iron Lords, there are Pilgrim Guard, but this is really the point, the turning point, where the Guardians finally start to become the Guardians, and more importantly in this case, the Titans really start to become the Titans. Let's continue talking about the Last City. The first thing we need to talk about right after the city is just starting to be founded are the faction wars. The faction wars were the first civil conflict within the city where individual factions and individual groups were all able to woo Risen to their sides, and indoctrinate isn't the right word, but these Risen have instilled in them a very, very strong sense of loyalty and belief in what these individual factions also believe in, and it inevitably causes conflict. And the only thing, literally the only thing that keeps humanity from being stamped out by itself at this point is the arrival of the Fallen. I spoke about that a little bit jumping the gun last episode, but it's at this point that the Fallen finally show up. And the Fallen showing up makes everyone turn their heads and everyone go, we have a single enemy now. We are squabbling amongst ourselves and we cannot be doing this. And we need to turn and we need to attack these Fallen before they destroy whatever scraps we have left. The first time the Fallen finally truly attack the last city is in an event known as the Battle of Six Fronts. And this is where the Titans became the Titans. This is where the Titans made a name for themselves. They are the great defenders of the last city, and they made sure that they stood their ground. This was a battle that should have been a massive battle of attrition. It should have been the Guardians really kind of barely hanging on, but instead, 4 orders of Titans held 6 individual battle fronts. That's why the battle is called the Battle of Six Fronts, and never faltered. They never faltered whatsoever, and this is where a lot of Guardians start to truly make their names. Guardians like Saint 14 and Osiris and Saladin Forge and Zavala and Shax. All of these Guardians who are really starting to show how much they believe in a united Guardian force and what a united Guardian force can do. Out of this battle, the first Vanguard commander was named. This is a Guardian, former Guardian technically now, because his ghost is dead and I'm really mad about that. But a Guardian by the name of Osiris. Osiris has now had an ongoing part in the story for a while, but for a long time, Osiris was pretty much just a legend. Osiris very much is a contender for one of the strongest Guardians to ever have existed. When Osiris was in his prime, he was unbelievable. Osiris could make multiple copies of himself, thousands of light-based copies of himself, to zip across these battlefields and just lay down fire on the enemy. His power is honestly kind of broken when you kind of compare it to the rest of the Guardians. It's weird. He's a warlock for starters also. He's not a Titan, he's a warlock, and he was the first commander of the Vanguard. The Vanguard are representatives of the Titans, the Hunters, and the Warlocks. One representative for each one of those orders, representing the Tower and the Guardians in the overall structure of government in the last city. They are essentially the commander-in-chief of armed forces of the Tower. That's the easiest way to think about it. And they take part in something called the Consensus, and the Consensus is the overall ruling body of the city now. You have 3 individual factions from the city that are represented there. Early on, these were Dead Orbit, New Monarchy, and the Concordat. The Concordat in particular are a very interesting group. There's really not much to go on them, but it's just worth noting here really quickly. They didn't want Osiris to be Vanguard commander at all. They just were not fans of it whatsoever. Shortly after the time of the Battle of Six Fronts, Saladin and his Iron Lords try to find something else to help out the city. They know that the walls are being built, but is there anything we can do to make this go faster? Is there anything we can do to go out there and find something that might be able to help us? And they found something. They got words of this almost magical, really fantastic technology called SIVA. I'm not going to go deep into SIVA here. That's a story for another time. But all you need to know is this. SIVA is essentially a nanomachine swarm that you can program to disassemble and reassemble matter on a basic level. I mean, extremely basic level. So it can be both a surgery tool and a construction tool. You can tell it fix that person or build that building or take that building down and just give me the raw materials from it. Let's be honest. You're trying to build a city right now and you get the word of something that can help you build that city in fractions of the time and with utmost efficiency. Hell yeah. Give that to me. Doesn't really go all that well for the Iron Lords. They finally break their way into the SIVA replication chamber, which is located in the old Cosmodrome. This Cosmodrome, beneath it, was the SIVA replication facility, but in going inside, the Iron Lords accidentally woke up Rasputin, who at this point had been asleep for hundreds of years as a defensive measure, waiting for the right time to come back and hopefully help put back together everything that fell apart during the collapse. Unfortunately, Rasputin doesn't like invaders going in and touching his stuff, so instead, Rasputin weaponizes SIVA and using its many orbital cannons, orbital satellites, and many frames, basically robots, to fight against them, almost completely wipes out the Iron Lords. To this day, there are 2, if you include us technically as the Young Wolf, 3 Iron Lords known to be alive. There were hundreds of Iron Lords at their peak. Just Iron Lords, not Guardians. I'm just talking about Iron Lords. There were hundreds of them. And they're almost all killed. Lord Saladin Forge, for a very long time, was the only one that we knew of. And there's a really good reason why he is the only one we know of. His only compatriot to survive, Lady Ephrodite, becomes basically a pacifist. And we've only seen her once. She goes off to live on a fringe world very far out in our system and has chosen to forego war. She's done with the fighting. In the wake of these events, Osiris in the tower is doing research. He's trying to find out everything he can about the foes of humanity, and he starts to really become obsessed with the Vex. To the point that his decision-making starts to come in question, whether or not he's been corrupted, whether he's using Guardian assets correctly. Nothing's going that well insofar as his image in the public eye. And you have to remember also at this time, he is very close with the Speaker. The Speaker, who I haven't spoke about at all, is the voice of the Traveler in the city. You can see him a few times in early cutscenes that I've already shown, but yeah, that's the Speaker. And he's kind of like the city's Pope, in a way. He is steadfast in making sure that everyone's trust and faith and belief in the Traveler is absolute. Not in an oppressive way, but just to make sure that the city has something to believe in and something to hope in. The Speaker, when it comes down to it, is pretty much the ultimate authority in the city. He sits at the head of the consensus, for example, and the Speaker is essentially forced to exile Osiris from the last city, and Osiris, absolutely furious, just disappears. I mean, absolutely vanishes from the city. So at this point, we have no Vanguard commander. And right then, the Battle of Twilight Gap happens. The Battle of Twilight Gap is the largest, as far as I know, largest battle between the Guardians and the Fallen that has ever taken place, and it takes place directly outside the walls of the city. I mean, you can see the city from Twilight Gap. It's one of the multiplayer maps you can play on in Destiny. 3 particular Guardians, being Saladin, Zavala, and Lord Shaxx, really are the ones who lead the effort in this battle and are eventually able to drive the forces of the Fallen away. At this point, the Vanguard realizes they can't just stay on the defensive. They need to go on the offensive. They need to start pushing the Fallen away. They were at the city's walls at this point, and we barely pushed them away. So this is where Saint 14 truly becomes Saint 14. The arguably most famous Guardian amongst the people of the last city. Saint 14 is the great guardian, the great titan, the defender of the city's walls. The mere sight of him, the mere mention of him raises cheers in the streets of the city. Because this man goes on a crusade outside the walls and absolutely tears into the fallen. He becomes a nightmare to the fallen and an absolute hero to the city during this period of time, because at this point, all he is thinking of is the defense of the city and making sure we still have a home tomorrow. More recent information has made this series of events a little bit more shades of gray than black and white, but he establishes himself as a true hero at this time. Now, while there is a lot going on elsewise, certain expeditions, everything that's happening in the Reef, everything that's happening with the Awoken right now in space, which is information that I will go into in a later episode when I am detailing the Awoken, because their story is dope. Now, we have our first actual attempted coup in the city. Remember the Concordat that I talked about earlier? Well, they realize in the wake of the Battle of Twilight Gap, and now that Osiris is gone, this is going to be their only attempt at a power grab. They were never happy with the Guardians, with the status quo in the city, and they do their best to try to fight to take over the city, to issue a true coup and put themselves in power. The major conflict at this point actually happens between the Concordat and New Monarchy, and you can actually find this on the multiplayer map Bannerfall. That's the only place I know of in the game where you can actually still see the Concordat's sigil, their icon, in the city in any way, shape, or form. The Concordat absolutely loses, and their leader, Lysander, and his followers are exiled from the last city. We have not heard anything else about this group since then, but I think it's really cool to have the idea that there is a pocket of humanity outside the last city who wants nothing more than to watch the last city fall. Like, Lysander could be a really cool enemy. We have no idea what he looks like, what he acts like, anything like that. But it's just a cool point, and I think it could be really cool to eventually dive into that. After this, the Guardians have their first two truly major battles against the Hive. The Hive are a group that I haven't really spoken about yet, and also deserve kind of their own massive block of information for me to drop on you guys. But to make it very simple, the Hive are an enemy that truly hunger for light. They are driven by a true need, and I don't mean this in like, oh, I need it. I mean, if they don't do this, they die. They tap their power directly from the darkness itself, which they pray to as the deep. And the more they make the deep happy, especially through tithes of light, the more power that individual hive gets. I'm not going to go all that deep into it at this point, but first happens the Battle of Burning Lake, which is the first true big fight that the Guardians have against the Hive. The Guardians are able to repel it. Shax does a fantastic job during this fight, and actually, she actually starts making swords after this, which is kind of badass. But the problem is the consensus wants a counterattack. And we also know at this point that the Hive are on the moon. They have essentially seeded the moon entirely as a staging platform for an invasion of the Earth. And in a way, high on our victories and prideful of how strong we are, because let's not lie, the Guardians are very, very strong. A very large force of Guardians makes its way to the moon. This is an invasion force numbering in the hundreds, if not in the thousands. I believe it is the thousands that make their way to a section of the moon now known as the Hellmouth, which is a giant gaping hole that goes all the way down to where the Hive have dug their massive under lunar network of tunnels and chambers and everything like that. And unfortunately for the Guardians, who are running into this battle thinking to themselves, hey, it doesn't matter. If I die, I just come back. That's what my ghost does. A massive Hive Knight. Massive. Holding a sword of pure dark power. Makes his way out of the Hellmouth and just starts cutting down Guardians. And they're not getting back up. This blade is literally eating their light as it goes through and cuts swaths of Guardians down. This Hive Knight is Crota, son of the Taken King Oryx, and one of the most powerful figures in all of the Hive. And it is this figure that is in charge of the Moon's forces and planning a full invasion of the Earth. The Moon is now completely off limits, and the Vanguard hopes that basically as long as the Guardians don't go back there, whatever is there, the Hive will just not invade. They'll just lose interest in us and choose not to return. And then there's one last great moment, one last great event I would like to point out before the revival of us, before the revival of the Young Wolf. And that is the great Ahamkara hunt. Ahamkara, also known as Wish Dragons, are shapeless, formless beings. They could basically take whatever form they want, but they tend to take dragon forms. Yeah, they're literally dragons who have the ability to literally grant wishes. It's really strange. They have the ability to make the desires of anyone happen. But it's always a monkey's paw situation. Sure, I give you a power or I let you experience something and things like that. But there has to be something for the Ahamkara. There has to be some kind of tribute. There has to be some kind of payment. And this allure, this power, is something that the Vanguard and the Guardians realize is incredibly dangerous and something that we can't allow to stay in our system. So the Ahamkara, who at this point live entirely on Venus, are completely hunted down and cut down and destroyed. And you'll see a lot of pieces of armor in Destiny that feature Ahamkara bones as part of them. And that's because the power of an Ahamkara actually persists through its death. It actually still exists and is, to a degree, conscious, even in a skeletal form. We know, for example, that the Ahamkara skull that is literally hanging above Lord Shaxx in the tower is to a degree sentient and is watching everything that's going on in the tower. There's a few lore cards actually from its point of view that make it really interesting. Things are not good, unsurprisingly, and it's kind of strange that I'm ending this step of, or I should say rather this chapter of Destiny history like I did last video by saying things aren't that great and we're not in much better of a situation than we were at the beginning of this video. The Iron Lords are dead. The Hive are on Earth. The Fallen are absolutely on Earth and got really close to taking over the tower. The Cabal are in the system, like I said, but we don't really know who they are yet. Our Vanguard leaders, multiple of them, are either dead, because many of the Vanguard leaders have died, especially Hunter Vanguard leaders. We've had a lot of them. And Osiris is exiled. You know, one of our most powerful guardians. In fact, I believe at this point, Saint 14 is also now stuck in the Vex network and unable to get out, which is a really big problem because that's another one of our most powerful guardians. At this point, the fire team of Zavala, Ikora Rey, and Cayde 6 now sit as essentially the last defenders of humanity in the Vanguard. We have lost hundreds, if not thousands, of Guardians in recent battles. A new invader is on the planet, and things are not good. And then, a shiny ivory ghost flying around the ruins of the old Cosmodrome outside of Old Russia finally finds his destined one, and the young wolf is revived. And we'll get into that more next episode. I'll also next episode be spending the first part of it talking specifically about the nature of ghosts, the light, and guardians. What exactly guardians are, because now that we are here, now that the player character is here, it's worth really picking apart what the guardians are insofar as our classes, subclasses, the mentality behind each one of them, even going so far as to talk a little bit about the armor that each one of the classes wears. So thank you guys again so much for the support in the first episode. I was blown away by the responses, the comments, everything that I saw across social media was incredible. So thank you guys again for your support of this project. I will be attempting to do this weekly, but again, unfortunately, you guys know the spiel, English me speak good. Please do like, comment, subscribe to this series. I'm having a lot of fun doing this. I hope you guys are enjoying it. And that's going to be it for episode 2 of the Destiny History Project. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys learned something. This has been Scan at GLHF TV.